This is the Farm Report. I'm Alan Graff, your hippie lawyer. Today we speak with Lauren Regan of the Civil Liberties Defense Center and Ann Fagan Ginger of the Meiklejohn Civil Liberties Institute. Both are incredible women warriors of the civil rights movement. Both are on the front lines of a raging battle to protect our liberties. First I speak with Lauren Regan, who has represented over 100 protesters, some of them environmentalists, others civil libertarians. And now, my interview with Lauren. How long have you been a lawyer?
I've been a lawyer since 1997, coming up on a decade.
All right.
In the next year.
And how did you get into being a lawyer? Did your mother talk you into this?
No.
Like mine?
No, not at all. I don't have any lawyers in my family. I thought I was going to be a veterinarian because I was a very staunch animal rights activist. I've been a vegetarian since I was 11. And when I realized that I was not going to be able to tolerate blood, guts, gore, and pain, I decided I was going to be an animal rights lawyer. And so since like about age 11, I have been wanting to be a lawyer.
Wow.
And I graduated from law school thinking I was going to do exclusively environmental law. And that still is a facet of my practice, is federal environmental litigation. But in protecting the environment, when my lawsuits weren't saving the planet, the clients that I represented were getting arrested, and that sort of launched me into the world of criminal defense and civil liberties defense, and more it's become much more of my practice than I would have expected. And over the last 5.5 years, increasingly so. I think the passage of the Patriot Act was sort of the precipitating factor that caused me to start up the CLDC and really become active in getting out into the public a lot more and trying to educate people and make sure that everyone knew exactly what was going on and how it was going to affect them in the long term.
Right. What kind of cases have you done in the last 3 or 4 years that are representative of your beliefs in terms of, what you've wanted to do as a lawyer?
Well, I think at this point, over the last 3 years, we've probably represented about 100 protesters.
You personally?
Yep.
Wow.
The vast majority, it's probably 60 in the last 2 years.
What kind of protesters?
Mostly environmental protesters, because that's sort of been what has primarily been on the forefront in the area where I live. But in recent years, especially over the last year, we've been dealing with anti-war protesters and immigration reform protesters, pro-choice protesters. The CLDC will basically help support all of the progressive movements that we feel are worthy of our help, I guess I would say. And so it's kind of expanded over the last year or so as we've kind of been able to outreach to other communities. But my immediate community, the one I knew best and worked with the most, was the environmental community. And since then, that has certainly led to other things, particularly in light of police misconduct and excessive force that's been used pretty prolifically on environmental protesters since 1999.
Yeah. Do you do all this for free?
I do, yes, which is why we started a nonprofit, because it was not really feasible economically to have about 90% of your practice be pro bono as a lawyer. But we do. We do it entirely for free. We don't expect compensation. We really think of it as, we're so grateful for those that step forward and act in their conscious beliefs, and feel so strongly for a cause that we also agree with, that they would risk their liberties to be arrested, that we feel it's only their due respect to have adequate legal representation, which is another reason why we started the CLDC.
Right. So you're defending people really who are on the front line of America, our greatest patriots, who are defending the forests, our civil liberties. Those are the kind of folks you're working with, right?
Yeah. I mean, recently, in the last couple of years, one of the cases that we just won, we represented a woman, just a housewife and a librarian, who dared to attend a Dick Cheney rally in Eugene. And when Cheney said the world is safer because of the war in Iraq, she kind of flashed to her 2 teenage boys that are draft age, and she dared to utter the word no. And in response to her just saying no, these secret brown shirts came in and
Did they actually have brown shirts on?
No, but they,
Okay.
they weren't FBI, they weren't
Yeah.
law enforcement, they were Dick Cheney's private goons. And
Really?
they came in, seized her, and brought her outside, and she was arrested by the Eugene police for trespassing, for simply
Were they
saying
rough?
the word no.
Were they rough with her at all?
No, they didn't, they didn't rough her up, so to speak. They just grabbed her by each elbow and dragged her out and handed her off to the Eugene police, who then charged her, and they prosecuted her for a misdemeanor. We challenged it on constitutional grounds and ended up winning. And that was just sort of kind of a bellwether type of case for what's going on right now. It was during the election campaign, the re-election campaign, and the Bush administration was trying to basically censor any view that didn't agree with them. And on the campaign trail especially, instead of having public rallies or public events where citizens could come and voice their opinions, they tried to do these orchestrated PR stunts. And if, a dissenting view dared express itself, they attempted to quash it immediately. Yeah. And that was just repulsive to me. And this woman was just an average citizen. She had never been an activist before, but that event and that case has really motivated her to become far more active than she probably ever would have been. So I think the Bush administration's motivation or their reason for what they did actually backfired on them, because instead of scaring this woman and disenfranchising her, they really have empowered her and engaged her. Over the last 2 years, we've represented about 60 forest protesters that were attempting to defend the Biscuit timber sales.
And the Biscuit timber sale is?
The Biscuit timber sale is the largest timber sale ever proposed by the Forest Service in the history of the Forest Service. And
Wow.
It was a
How many acres?
500,000 acre timber sale.
500,000 acres. I mean,
Huge.
Give us an idea of, is that the size of half the size of Rhode Island, or what?
It
sounds huge.
It is huge. For anyone who's been to Oregon, it's in the Siskiyou National Forest, and it's probably the size of one of our smaller states. It spans 7 different wilderness areas. This is an area that has been designated as a UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve, meaning there are only about a handful of locations on the planet that are designated as so incredibly important to biodiversity and the environment of the entire planet that they were set aside forever to be protected. And the Bush administration proposed this timber sale solely based on poking the eye of environmentalists. After the WTO in 1999, the environmental movement was gaining ground. The movement was growing stronger and stronger, and in the aftermath of a naturally occurring wildfire, the Bush administration used that as their excuse to go in and attempt to do this massive timber sale. They got the most comments in opposition ever in the history of the Forest Service. 24,000 people volunteered to write comments and sent them to the Forest Service opposing the sale. They continued to go forward with it, and I think over 100 people were arrested trying to stop these sales. They were the first timber sales to try to go into late successional reserves, which were set aside for spotted owls, and inventoried roadless areas, which were set aside as reserves never to be touched by man. They are basically wilderness
It was set
areas.
aside previously.
They were set aside in the 1990s.
Okay, but in the Clinton administration did
under
that?
the Northwest Forest Plan.
And what kind of trees are we talking about there? Is it, in terms of how old?
Never before cut. These are
Never
original old growth
before
ancient
cut.
forests. Yeah, they're
So these
no
trees
roads.
were there before the white man came here, basically.
Yeah, and the reason,
Wow.
I'm the lead attorney for the environmental litigation as well, and just yesterday I actually had oral argument on this case, so we're still fighting it in the courts.
And you just flew from Oregon to attend
Seattle.
Seattle
was where the Ninth Circuit was, so I flew from Seattle to
how many, so we've got all these trees that have never been cut. I mean, that's just amazing to me that anybody would want to cut that. How many trees, I mean, how many acres of trees do we have in America that have never been cut? Is this the last sort
Less than 2% of the land base in the United States are roadless areas, meaning actual reserves that are untouched by humans. That's the incredible value of these areas. And the worst part about these sales, not to divert our discussion, but the worst part about them is they claimed that the reason they were going to do this logging was to prevent future wildfires and to make economic gain. And in fact, the result of it has been increased fire risk, and they've lost millions and millions of dollars because everyone knew that these were not profitable sales. The timber industry itself said there's a glut in the timber market. We don't even want these trees. And to force the process through in Washington, D.C., they, made up numbers, they made up data, they made up science, and they pushed it through on the American public. Some of the Forest Service's own experts and scientists have now left the Forest Service and are my experts in the environmental case. It's just a corrupt travesty. It's the worst example of government corruption that I've seen in my almost 10 years of being an environmental lawyer. And the people who were out there trying to defend this area ranged in age from 76 to 13.
Wow.
We had grandmas in lawn chairs blocking the bridge, the only way into these timber sales, who got arrested multiple times and spent weeks in jail as a result of defending the planet. And they had absolutely no qualms about what they were doing. They basically flat out stated that they were putting their bodies there because it was the only way to protect these areas, and they were so sacred to their grandchildren and everyone else.
Wow.
It was an honor to represent them.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I'm afraid to ask this. How successful were the environmentalists and you in terms of protecting this beautiful, untouched, national treasure?
Well, it's sort of a double-edged sword. In terms of litigation, in terms of trying to get injunctions and stop these cases, there was no doubt that we were right on the law. But the political winds were so strong and stinky that, in fact, we were rolled over the top of time and time again by the industry, who came in and tried to log the snot out of everything as fast as possible, racing us to the courts. The other travesty of these sales is, normally the Forest Service puts up a timber sale for auction, and they'll get, 20 bids. In these cases, some of the sales only had a single bidder, and normally these sales would go for roughly about $300 per million board feet. In these cases, some of them went for as low as $13. So our old growth reserves in this amazing ecosystem went for $13 for 1 million board feet of timber, which is a huge amount of trees.
Next, we speak with another incredible woman warrior, Ann Fagan Ginger of the Meiklejohn Civil Liberties Institute. Ann lays the word on us as to why Bush & Co. should be held accountable for international war crimes. Ann. You're the executive director of the Meiklejohn Civil Liberties Institute.
We call it now a think tank on human rights and peace law.
Okay.
Did you ever hear of peace law?
No, I haven't.
Well, if you can have military law, you can have peace law, so I made it up.
All right, well, that's good.
So all of the law that covers peace, we discuss.
All right, and I know...
And I should probably interrupt and say that it sounds like something to say I'm a lawyer and I won a case in the U.S. Supreme Court and all that, but reality-wise, I come from an English Quaker, Irish Catholic, Lithuanian Jewish, Midwestern, socialist, journalist family. So that's really who I am.
All right.
And I became a lawyer out of that background.
As far as I see, you're one of the experts in terms of international law, what agreements we've made, how it relates to domestic law. And I saw something very interesting today, and I'll kind of throw it at you here. one of my friends, it's one of these internet posts. It may or may not have any teeth to it, but someone said that Jenna Bush was busy buying land in Paraguay right now just for insurance in case when the Bushes are out, the international court doesn't come after them for international war crimes. I was like, okay, that sounds plausible.
Right.
And do they have anything to be afraid of, the Bushes?
Well, I don't know if they have anything to be afraid of. They have a great deal to be accountable for, and
Right.
there is no doubt that the Bush administration has committed war crimes. And I think that it is important for the American people to understand this, and to understand that this is not just international law. You're talking about international law.
Yeah.
Just so everybody's clear, in the U.S. Constitution it says, a treaty is the supreme law of the land and must be enforced by the federal and state court judges. So what you think of as international law is domestic law. So when the U.S. ratified the UN Charter,
Yeah.
it became the law of the city of Austin. And when the mayor of Austin swore to uphold the Constitution and laws of the United States, and the president, and the vice president, all of them,
Right.
they were swearing to uphold the UN Charter. And that is also true of every other treaty. So that the war crimes that we're talking about, the Geneva Convention and the Nuremberg tribunals that the U.S. helped create to try the criminals, the Nazi criminals after World War II, that law applies as domestic law within the United States. And there is no question that holding people at Guantanamo Bay with no habeas corpus is a violation of the U.S. Constitution and of these treaties which are part of the supreme law of the land. Same with Abu Ghraib.
Yeah. Now, what about this new law that was just signed in maybe about a week ago? They call it the torture law.
No, it's called the Military Commissions Act.
Right.
And
Well, we call it the torture law.
Okay, the official name.
And the Military Commissions Act. And basically, it's sort of thumbed its nose at the decision in Hamden, and which the Supreme Court, as far as I understand, verified that the Geneva Convention is the law of the land, like you're saying. And what Bush did, and tell me if I've got my legal analysis wrong here, is that he got Congress to say, no, we no longer have to go along with the Geneva Convention. Is that what happened?
Well, yes, but that isn't possible, because in addition to the Geneva Convention, for some reason the media hasn't mentioned it, there's another thing called another treaty, and it's called the International Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. And the U.S. ratified that in 1994. Treaty's the supreme law of the land, Article 6, Clause 2. So the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment is also part of UN law. And there's nothing vague about it, the way Bush has said. It's very clear-cut. And these treaties that the U.S. has ratified, we've ratified 3 human rights reporting treaties, require the U.S. government to make a report to a committee about what we're doing in all of these aspects. And that committee has defined very, very clearly what is degrading treatment, what is inhuman treatment, what is torture. And
nothing fuzzy about it.
Nothing fuzzy. And what they did in...
Which is what Bush claims.
Right. It's just straight a lie.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he knows about this treaty. He should have been told. His attorney general or any lawyer could have told him.
Yeah.
And what they did in South Africa is interesting after the success of the anti-apartheid movement. They took all of these treaties and they stuffed them directly into their constitution. We didn't do that, but we have said under the Constitution that they are the supreme law of the land.
Right.
So the answer is Bush is violating the Geneva Convention, and he is violating the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. And a president cannot do that legally.
Yeah. And so for every person that's been tortured by stemming from order or policy of the president, he is ultimately responsible as a perpetrator of a war crime, correct?
I would say so.
Yeah.
And any nation in the world could sue the United States in the World Court seeking to solve this problem. And nations are unwilling to do that because they're afraid of the repercussions. But any nation could go to the General Assembly and say, we want the World Court to decide, is it legal or illegal for President Bush to run Guantanamo? They so far haven't been willing to do that. But if you read the history of Nuremberg and realize that we wrote the Nuremberg Principles. We helped write them.
Right.
And we did it for a reason. So that I think people don't quite, it was a long time ago, World War II. But
Right.
at the time of World War II, the world had been destroyed twice within one lifetime, World War I and World War II. And it was quite clear that the people of the world would not pick up the pieces and clean things up and build a new world if they thought there'd be another world war in 20 years.
Right.
So they had to write the UN Charter, and
Right.
it had to say the things that are in there.
Yeah.
And then they wrote these additional treaties. So it isn't that it was a gift. We won those rights, and they're in these treaties, and the treaties are the supreme law of the United States and must be enforced in the United States.
Yeah. Now I want to ask you, you talk about the Nuremberg Principles, and to me, my family's from the Holocaust. I lost my grandparents there, and so I'm sort of, I feel sometimes emotional when I hear the term Nuremberg Principle. And one of the things that, when I hear that term, what resonates in me is the idea of defending yourself, being complicit in the acts of your superiors. Now,
It's explicit
yeah,
that to obey an illegal order is illegal.
is illegal.
There
And that was
is-
the Adolf Eichmann
Absolutely.
defense.
There is no defense that it was a superior order. If it is illegal, if it is against human rights, if it is against the law, and you are told to commit that act, you have
Yeah.
a duty to disobey
Right.
the order and to obey the basic
Yeah.
law.
I know there's, I forgot his name, there's a lieutenant who is the first commissioned officer who has said he wouldn't go to Iraq, and he said he wouldn't obey an illegal order, and,
Right.
and now he's facing 7 years
Right.
in prison. Okay, so we have obviously the commander-in-chief, Bush. He's guilty of war crimes.
Well, let's just even go back a step.
Right.
This is not a war. Let's just be clear.
Okay.
A war is between one country and another country. And the way you start a legal war in the United States, it's in the Constitution. The president goes to Congress, and he says, in effect, this nation or these nations are doing 1, 2, 3, 4. These are illegal.
Right.
We need to go to war to stop these acts.
Yeah.
When you say there's a war on terror against no nation,
Right.
and there's no list of things that must be done in order to end that war, then you're making up the concept of a war on terror that is not a legal concept.
Right. Right. I want to ask you about complicity. We talked about people who were taking orders. What about people who aren't doing anything? Let's say Democrats who have helped vote in these procedures. And let's even go further. We talk about the good Germans, the ones who turned their backs or joined the ranks of the military, didn't say anything for fear of retribution. In effect, under the Nuremberg Principles, couldn't you say that a large majority of the American citizens are actually guilty of international crimes as well by paying taxes into the war machine? Am I going too far here in terms of pushing this, or is there some basis for what I'm proposing?
I don't think it helps to go that route.
Okay.
Because the majority of people in Germany who were not pro-Nazi and who did not leave Germany gardened and wrote memoirs. And that's what people in the United States are doing today. They're gardening and they're writing memoirs. They may vote Democratic. They may not be voting for Bush. They are not preventing Bush and the military machine from doing what they're doing.
Right.
But they are...
Well, different degrees of that. Some people
Right.
are protesting.
But we've also
Yeah.
focused on the government.
Right.
And I think that that's a mistake, because we're in the situation we're in now because of oil companies. We're in this situation because of companies that are called defense products. We're in the situation because the economic system and the governmental system are combined with the military system to destroy democracy, to
Right.
destroy the power of Congress, and to destroy the power of the courts. I mean, that's really what is involved.
Right.
And Bush is going to be the king of the world, supported by the military, the administrative offices, and the corporations. So that if a worker goes to his or her job in the morning and goes to a union meeting, and the union meeting votes to spend money to defeat Bush, that's a step against this series of actions. If a worker goes to work and treats a fellow worker as a human being, whether they have a green card or not, that worker is obeying the basic law the right to human dignity, which is written into the UN Charter and is therefore part of our law. Green card or not, a human being has the right to human dignity. So I don't think it helps to talk about whether all or most Americans are guilty. I'm not prepared to say what the percentages are.
Yeah.
I travel around a good deal and give a number of presentations.
Right.
And there are many, many people who are upset. And
Yeah.
they're doing something.
Right.
And a lot of them are doing something in their local city. They're getting clean water. They're saying that the developers can't just take over all the land. They're saying we want to have a fair minimum wage or a living wage in our city.
Right.
So a lot of people are trying at the local level. The problem is we haven't figured out how to stop the juggernaut. And for
That's
that
right.
to happen, everybody's going to have to do more than garden and write memoirs. And
That's
they're going
right.
to have to do more than voting.
Yeah.
They're going to have to take some additional steps. And the value that I think lawyers have to add to this is to tell them that what they're doing is legal.
Right.
That this was written into the laws that were ratified by the United States Senate,
Right.
saying we cannot again permit this kind of horror to happen.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that we helped design those laws, ratified them to prevent something like Nazi Germany from happening, and then we've slowly become a little bit like the enemy we've
Not
feared.
a little bit. This is much
lot.
worse.
Yeah.
No, this is worse because Germany didn't have nuclear weapons.
That's right.
And when the United States makes a fuss because North Korea attempted to make one nuclear weapon go off,
Yeah.
when we have a large nuclear weapons arsenal in South Korea directed right now at North Korea and at
Right.
the other countries in that area,
Right. Good point.
we cannot possibly be talking in this way. And a lot
That's
of
right.
things that your viewers may not know, there's something called the International Court of Justice, the World Court. It's
Mhm.
one part of the United Nations. We helped establish this.
Yeah.
And in 1996, the World Court was asked by the General Assembly, are nuclear weapons legal or illegal? That's how this court works. It isn't just one country suing another country.
Right.
The General Assembly can ask a question. So they asked the question, are nuclear weapons legal or illegal? And the World Court unanimously, and that means the judge from the U.S., from the U.K., from France, from Russia, from China, from all of the nuclear weapon states, and the other judges agreed unanimously that nuclear weapons are illegal. And they said specifically, just like in Brown against Board, you have a duty to abolish segregated schools. They said there is a duty to negotiate to conclusion for nuclear disarmament in all its aspects under strict and effective international control. That's about a quote.
Right.
Nobody in the U.S. media picked up on it.
Right.
Very few people in the peace movement picked up on it. We never mention it.
Yeah.
But the reality is that more than 10 years ago, the World Court ruled nuclear weapons are illegal.
Right.
So while I think it's not good that North Korea felt it had to make one nuclear weapon,
Right.
or that Iran is doing whatever it's doing, the U.S. has, I think, 7,000 or 8,000 nuclear weapons on alert all over the world.
Yeah.
So who are we to talk in this way?
Exactly.
And who are we as U.S. citizens not to demand that the U.S. now disarm in a nuclear way?
Yeah. Don't do as we do as we say.
Absolutely.
And so now, particularly because we've become such the biggest bully on the block,
It's beyond belief.
yeah, who's gonna believe us? I don't want to sound Pollyannish in any way, but is there any glimmer of hope through the madness here?
Absolutely. I think that I'm not a Pollyanna either. And I would say that just so it's clear, I lived through McCarthyism, and this is much worse. I want that to be
Really?
clear. Absolutely, much worse.
Mm.
And I had relatives who were called before the Un-American Committee and all the different things that happened, and people lost their jobs. But this was much worse.
Mm. In terms of infiltration and isolation of activists?
In terms of the number of people who were affected.
Okay.
The total number. The difference is that today, I don't know these people. They're not my
Right.
friends. They're from the Middle East.
Right.
They're immigrants, or they're at Guantanamo. We had no Guantanamo. We had no Abu Ghraib during
That's
McCarthyism.
right.
And the professors who lost their jobs, I knew them. I don't know the people who are trying to enter the U.S. or re-enter the U.S. and are being denied admission. I don't know the people who are being detained.
Right.
So I'm not thinking about it. But the total number of people attacked is
Yeah.
much greater.